Welcome back to The Price of Business. I'm your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. One of our regular contributors here on The Price of Business is our good friend Jason Smith, and he has an interesting company called Operating Costs, and it's at operatingcosts.com. And always love having you on the program, Jason. Tell us a little bit about what you do over there at Operating Costs before we introduce our guests.
Absolutely. I'm the founder of Max Profits at operatingcosts.com. We provide our clients with expense reduction services that allow organizations to maximize operating profits by saving up to 40% in common expense categories. And all of our work is guaranteed. We save our clients money, or our services are free.
Gotta love that. And your guest today looks like a great one.
Yes, I'm super excited about this. Our guest today, Frank Cespedes, he's a senior lecturer at the Entrepreneurial Management Unit at Harvard Business School and author of Aligning Strategy and Sales, the choices, systems, and behaviors that drive effective selling. It's a very long title, but it seems like a great read.
Yeah, Frank, welcome to the program. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do.
Well, thank you. Good to virtually meet you, Kevin, and you as well, Jason. Probably the best thing I can do is tell you how I came to this topic. My academic research always focused on companies' go-to-market elements, including sales. Then when I left academia and ran a business for 12 years, like other entrepreneurs, I had to meet payroll and sell. And then after getting lucky in business and returning to academia, I taught strategy for a few years. And the fact is, despite decades of attention to planning in schools, there is, in fact, very little research about how to link strategy with the nitty-gritty of field execution, especially sales efforts. In fact, if the gods of strategy even mention sales, it's typically advice from a fortune cookie. Get your incentives right or work as a team. In other words, do good and avoid evil. Conversely, there is a vast literature about selling. Most of it is anecdotal, but some is grounded in very good research. But that advice is misleading in a different way because the consultants and trainers who make their living that way have an incentive to promote the universal applicability of their particular selling methodology, and they also treat sales in isolation from strategy.
Yeah.
So the result, I think, is that much sales training actually has a perverse effect. People work harder, but not necessarily smarter. And my book, I would hope, tries to address that gap.
Yeah, absolutely. I tell you, I think what you kind of nailed the problem with business in general. You almost think that the business culture today is almost driven by attorneys, where risk mitigation rather than growth is the number one desire.
Well, some of that, I think, is a function of the prolonged recession. Some of it, as we know, is the growing regulatory regime. But what Jason Smith does at Operating Costs is perennially important. You've got to get your cost structure in line, but nobody, as they say, ever cut their way to prosperity and profitable growth. The top line is at least as important.
Absolutely. The top line is super important, but we can increase profits by either increasing our sales or decreasing our overhead costs. It's interesting to me. A while ago, I wrote a white paper, and the white paper was actually called Mind the Gap. It highlighted the gap between anticipated or planned cost reductions and actual cost savings. So it seems that to some degree, we are preaching the same message. Tell us how non-sales folks like CFOs can benefit from understanding and reading your strategies in your book.
Yeah, great question. Let me put it this way. At the risk of sounding a little bit pedantic, let me just review what I think are the finance basics. There's basically four ways that any company increases its value, right? You invest in projects that earn more than the cost of capital invested in them. You do your best to increase profits from your existing capital investments. You grow by subtraction. You reduce assets in activities that earn less than their cost of capital. And then whenever possible, you try to reduce the organization's cost of capital itself. Now, I've been involved in as many strategy meetings in my career, I believe, as anyone, with companies around the world. And my experience is that most C-suite executives, the CEO, the CFO, get what I just outlined. And if they don't get it, they learn it in a hurry after they get beaten up in their first investor presentation or two. What many of them don't get, however, and I think this is relevant to your question, Jason, is how sales affects materially, and arguably more than any other activity in the company, all four of those value creation levers. Why do companies invest? The vast majority of investments in any company are driven by revenue-seeking activities with customers. As a result, customer selection criteria, the call patterns of the people in sales, determine who comes in as a customer, and that in turn generates investments. It's important to keep in touch with that. If you want to increase profits from existing investments, you need two-way communication, not one-way communication between the C-suite and the field. The third way to increase value, reducing the assets devoted to activities that earn less than their cost of capital, requires good links with sales information. And then, the fourth lever, what creates capital needs in most firms? In most firms, the capital needs are driven by the amount of money they have available for working capital requirements and growing the firm. And by far the biggest driver of cash in and cash out is the selling cycle. What gets sold, how fast, and at what price. So at a minimum, Jason, I think the answer to your question is that the CFO needs to be in touch with those activities that affect the guts of what he or she ultimately gets paid to manage.
Mm-hmm. Got to wrap it up with that. Great conversation, though. Extremely interesting. Do you want to mention that? Why don't you give us your website real quick, Frank?
FrankCespedes.com.
FrankCespedes.com, and that's Frank, F-R-A-N-K, obvious. Less obvious is the second part, CESPEDES.com, and also the name of your book for people to look up.
Aligning Strategy and Sales.
And then Jason Smith, you can learn more about him at operatingcosts.com. Shame on you if you're sitting there wondering in your executive suite whether or not you're running as efficiently financially as you can without talking to someone like Jason, because you got everything to gain and nothing to lose. And Jason, your final thoughts before we wrap it up.
No, absolutely. I read the summaries. I would love to say I read your whole book, Frank, but unfortunately I haven't, but I think I will. And what Frank says is absolutely 100% banging on the nail there.
Very good. Great stuff. Thanks to both you gentlemen.
Thank you.
Do you want to remind the listener out there the best content here, including this interview, can be found at the national news website, usdailyreview.com. While there, like it on Facebook, follow it on Twitter. Also want to mention this show continues 24/7 at priceofbusiness.com. When we come back, we're going to have much more for you. Stay tuned for it right after this.